Welcome to Creepy Loop. Today, we've got a spine-chilling tale that will send shivers down your spine. Get ready to dive into the world of the unknown as we unfold a story of mysterious footsteps, unseen pursuers, and the darkness that lurks within. Stay tuned for a gripping journey. Diane was walking home in the evening. The sun was going down, and it was fall. The streets in the city were curvy and had bumpy stones. In the countryside, this time might be pretty, but not here. Big brick buildings crowded the streets, making it hard to see the sunset. The buildings were so close that they made deep shadows on the ground. The street lights were already on, making yellow circles of light. But there were gaps of darkness between them. The lights were bright, but they couldn't light up the whole space. They hid most of the stars, so the sky above the city was just a grayish black. If you looked up while walking between the close buildings, it seemed like the tops of the buildings were leaning towards each other. It was like they were trying to cover the street with their hands and block out the sky. Even an empty street felt very tight and small. Diane walked home alone when it was getting dark. She kept her eyes on the road, not looking up or around. It could be risky to be alone in the city at night, and Diane knew that. Even though it wasn't too late yet, she felt uneasy. She walked fast, ignoring the shadows of people passing by, the lights and sounds from pubs and shops, and the dark alleyways in between. Diane just wanted to be home, cozy in front of the fire with a good book. She blamed herself for not planning better as the streets got darker. Gradually, Diane started feeling more scared than usual. A shiver went down her back, and she walked faster, trying to figure out why. It's the feeling you get when you're alone in the dark. Your heart beats faster, you get goosebumps, and you feel uneasy. Most times, there's something that triggers these feelings, a movement, a strange sound, a cold breeze. Diane couldn't figure out what it was this time, and it bothered her. The city around her carried on with its usual evening routine, busy but not too loud. It seemed like nobody noticed one young woman among many others. But Diane couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, but it stayed with her, making her tense and uneasy. Almost home, Diane thought, just a few more minutes of walking. Gotta get home. But the strange feeling got stronger as she hurried down the dark streets toward her cozy townhouse. Diane became more aware, listening closely to the city's sounds, the wind, the noisy fun from the pubs, people talking quietly, the buzzing streetlights, and her own footsteps on the bumpy stones. Wait. A quick feeling hit her. It wasn't just feeling watched, it was feeling followed. As she focused on her footsteps, she thought she heard a weird echo. Even though she walked this road every day, there was something strange in the sound of her steps. It was like someone was walking right behind her, step by step. Just thinking about it made her uneasy feeling turn into real fear. Her heart raced, and her palms got sweaty. Diane gathered her courage and quickly looked back to see who was following her. Nobody was there. The street behind Diane was almost empty, with only 3 guys walking away in the other direction, looking a bit tipsy. It's just my imagination, she thought. But oddly, that thought didn't make her feel better. The weird feeling stayed even after she turned back around. If anything, it got stronger. It felt like someone was staring at the back of her head. Her mouth got dry, and her hands shook. The clicking of her footsteps seemed loud, like click-clack, echoing in a heavy silence. Diane desperately listened, trying to catch any strange sounds from her supposed pursuer. But her rational mind couldn't figure it out, even though her gut feeling said something was wrong. Trying to confuse whoever might be following her, she walked faster, then slower, and did some funny steps. But it didn't help. The strange echo continued, making her more nervous and scared. When Diane was a kid, she had a really active imagination. She was scared of the dark and quiet, thinking about monsters and weird noises. Every night, she would turn on a little lamp next to her bed because she was scared. If her parents noticed, they would turn it off, and she hated that. She thought if she reached over in the dark, monsters would grab her wrist and pull her under the bed. The only safe spot was the top of her bed, like a magic circle. She would lie there, scared and unable to move until the morning sun came. It was a tough time, especially if she needed to use the bathroom. Yes, Diane knew she had a big imagination, but she thought she had control over it. She was a grown woman, not a kid who imagines things. Yet, the feeling of being watched, followed, hunted wouldn't go away. Some deep part of her knew it. With every passing moment, she felt more sure that this wasn't just her imagination. And it made her more and more scared. Maybe the person following her hid or ducked into an alley last time she turned around. That's what she thought. So, she bit her lip, got ready, and suddenly spun around to face whoever was behind her. But there was nothing. Just an empty street. Seeing the dark, empty path almost made Diane have a panic attack. Everything around her seemed scary, like the city was hiding something terrifying beneath its surface. It was hard for her to breathe, and she felt a heavy weight on her chest. She held back a scream, just barely. The urgent need to get inside, away from the fear, took over. Diane rushed into the nearest well-lit building, letting the door slam behind her without looking back. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed, trying to calm down. She had entered a small pub, not the fanciest place, but brighter than outside. People in small groups were sitting around, seeming friendly enough. Some were curious about her strange entrance. Diane still felt uneasy from the attention and the feeling of being followed, but being inside helped her panic calm down. She sat at a quiet table near the door, trying to gather her thoughts. A waitress noticed her and kindly asked if she wanted something to drink. Diane asked for a cup of hot tea, please. The waitress smiled and patted her hand before going to get the tea. Diane felt better now, although the feeling of being watched lingered. She was facing away from the door and window, but a small part of her thought something or someone might be looking at her through the window. She tried to tell herself she was being silly, that it was all just her imagination. But just as she was convincing herself, a man casually slid into the seat across from her. Diane noticed she was the only woman in the pub. She was about to tell the man she wasn't interested in flirting when she took a closer look. He was much older, like a dad's age. His brown hair was turning gray, and he had a little bit of stubble. Wrinkles around his blue eyes made him look kind and wise. The golden wedding band on his left hand showed Diane he wasn't some young guy looking for a date. Forgive a stranger for sounding nosy, but... Are you doing all right, lass? You're looking a bit troubled, and you stormed in here earlier like you were in a downright panic. His voice was deep and rough, but also soft, with a soothing accent. Oh, I'm doing all right, Diane said, feeling a bit embarrassed. Just had a bit of a fright on my way home. Nothing really, just my imagination, I suppose. Bit embarrassing, actually. I just wanted to stop in, get a bit of a hot drink, and calm down before heading back home for the night. The man nodded, taking a sip from his mug as the waitress brought Diane's tea. As the waitress left, he said, yeah, these city streets can be a bit daunting at night, with everything being so packed in. Not all safe for a young lass walking alone, either, he added with a serious look. Diane nodded, feeling a bit shy, looking down at her tea instead of at the man. What was it that put such a fright into you, anyhow? Oh, like I said, nothing really, Diane replied, just a creepy feeling I got, nothing to worry about. The man put down his mug, leaning his chin on his hand. Why don't you tell me a bit about it, lass? Talking about these things as a way of making them feel better sometimes. Usually, Diane wouldn't want to share something embarrassing, especially with a stranger. But she needed comfort, and the man seemed sincere. She ended up telling him the whole story. Surprisingly, instead of nodding or looking amused, the man's face got darker and more troubled as Diane spoke. When she finished, he sat in silence, staring into his mug. Feeling the silence was too much, Diane finally said, Sir." "Oh," he said, looking surprised. "Oh, sorry lass, I didn't mean to ignore you. It's just..." "What is it?" Diane asked, feeling a creeping sense of fear returning. "Well, you hear stories around here, lass. Some superstitious nonsense, mostly, but there's no denying there's some stuff that happens around these parts at night that just hasn't been explained. And what you just told me sounds a lot like an old story I hear every now and then." A cold shiver went down Diane's spine. "What story?" The man tapped his fingers nervously on the table, looking unsure. "Look, I don't want to scare you for no reason, lass, but I grew up in a superstitious family, and believe me, it's been passed along enough for me to think it'd be risking your safety not to tell you." "Tell me what?" "Please, I want to hear this. Even if it is just superstitious." "Well, as the tales go, there's this thing that comes around the streets at night, in the city like this. Some kind of monster or ghost, but nobody knows what it really is or what it looks like. And every now and then, for some reason, it'll latch onto somebody and follow them around, walking right behind them as they go about their business. The catch is, you see, it's not really real. At least not in our world, not normally. I don't get all that weird metaphysics stuff or nothing, but supposedly it's on some kind of other plane, mostly. One that overlaps with our world but isn't really a part of it, like it's below what we can see and feel. Most people go through their lives hardly even knowing it's there. Unless something there takes a liking to you. Even then, it can't do much. It can see you, and it can follow you around, but it can't really harm you, see, because it's not really there. In fact, some people don't notice it following them at all, just go on about their evenings without a care in the world. But others, people who are more sensitive, more open to stuff that isn't exactly rational and concrete, they'll notice it following them. They'll feel a cold chill on their backs, a sense of being stalked, like a sixth sense or something. They may even hear it following them a bit or catch a quick glimpse of it, just for a moment out of the corner of their eye. Never more than that, because it's not really there, remember? At least not yet. ChatGPT. Diane felt scared. Yet? That's why it's the sensitive ones who have to worry about it, see? If you don't notice it, it can follow you around all day, and it won't make a difference. But if you do notice it, if you start feeling it, and seeing it, and expecting it, well, it starts getting more real to you, doesn't it? And as it starts getting more real to you, it starts getting more real, period. The man paused. "You said you looked back at the thing twice, didn't you, lass?" Diane, fascinated and terrified, just gave quick, twitchy nods in response. "Don't get too scared now, lass, but they say it's the looking that gives it its real strength, looking back and expecting with all your heart to see something there. That brings it closer to this world, makes it more solid. The first time you look back at it, it immediately starts to feel more real to you. Whatever scared feelings you may have had before, they'll go up tenfold after you look back. The footsteps will get louder, the glimpses clearer. You'll be more and more convinced that something's following you around. The same thing happens the second time you look back. Fear gets jacked up another notch. The monster gets closer and more solid, starts following right behind you, breathing down your neck. It knows it's getting near the kill. They say the fear is near unbearable, and you feel compelled to look around one more time, but that's the one thing you should never do. Because that third look is all it takes to bring that thing fully into our world. Real and solid like you are. Turn around that third time, and you'll be looking it straight in the eye. No one knows exactly what you'll be looking at, mind you. Some say it doesn't even have a form of its own until you give it one. And when you do, it'll be your worst nightmare. Your own personal boogeyman, Whatever thing, real or imaginary, scares you the most on God's green earth, that's what it'll look like. But of course, that's all speculation because as far as I know, no one has seen that thing and lived to tell about it. The only thing about it that's for sure is that it's a murderous, evil thing with an unholy hunger for human flesh and bone. The moment you see it, it'll seize you and tear you limb from limb, rip you apart and disembowel you while you're still alive and screaming, saving your head for last. The only thing the police will find of you when it's done will be some ripped up, bloody clothes and maybe a few slivers of bone. Some say that ain't even the worst part, though. Some say that after it's done devouring your flesh, that thing will steal your very soul and drag it into that other world it comes from, and there it'll torment you for all eternity. Still just speculation, but it's about as plausible as anything else in the story. By now, Diane was as pale as a sheet, shaking in sheer terror. She was sure the awful monster the man talked about was the same one stalking her. The story echoed exactly how she felt walking down the street a few minutes ago. What do I do? She pleaded with the man. How do I get away from this thing? Did I lose it by coming in here? The man sadly shook his head. Probably not, lass. From what I heard, it don't give up that easy. Even if it didn't follow you in here, which might explain you feeling a bit better, it's probably still standing outside waiting for you. It's smart. It knows this ain't your home. And it's real determined. It wants you, I'm sure you could tell. Diane hid her face in her hands and let out a quiet sob. Yes, she could tell. She could feel its horrible eyes on her through the window even now, boring into the back of her head. Then what do I do? She asked, her voice trembling with held-back tears. How can I make it go away? There has to be a way, there just has to be. There is, lass, the man soothed her, and it's a pretty simple thing, too, but it won't be easy. Remember, that thing ain't real until you look back at it that third time. It can't hurt you unless you do that. What you have to do is go home. Go out there and walk straight down that street to your house. And no matter what you do, no matter what you see or hear, no matter how strong the compulsion hits you, you must not look back. You already looked back twice, once more and it'll have you for sure. Go home and walk into your house, but don't look back just yet. Not even to lock the door behind you. That thing doesn't care about locks and doors, not really, and you're not safe even in your own home. Not until you complete the ritual. It's like knocking on wood or throwing spilled salt over your shoulder. It'll drive the bad things away. What you gotta do, without looking back, mind you, is go to your bedroom and find something precious to you, some kind of personal talisman. For lots of people, it's some religious thing, a Bible or crucifix, something like that, but it doesn't have to be. Just has to be meaningful to you. You find this talisman, and you turn it over in your hands 3 times, while repeating the following incantation 3 times, Tenebras non timeo, qui nihil residet. I think it's Latin or something. Anyway, once you do that, the monster should be driven away, and you can go ahead and open your eyes and turn around. Then go lock up your doors and go straight to bed, and everything will be better in the morning. Having failed once, the monster ought never to come after you again. The man stopped talking and looked at the scared young woman sitting across from him. Think you can do that, lass? Diane took a deep breath and drank the last of her hot tea, trying her best to calm herself. She stilled the trembling of her hands and let her heart slow down. Biting her lip and gathering her courage, she looked the man straight in the eye and said, "Yes. I can do it." "Good. You look like a strong and smart woman to me, lass. You'll do just fine. Just remember not to look back, no matter what. Could you maybe come with me? Walk me home? It would be easier with someone by my side to talk to." The man shook his head. "Sorry, lass, it just don't work like that. You started this thing alone, you gotta finish it alone. But you can do it. I believe in you." Diane bit her lip and nodded. "Okay, I think I get it. Thank you. No problem at all, lass. Think you're ready? Squeezing her fists tight and gathering all her courage, Diane nodded again, once, with finality. Then she stood up. Good luck to you, lass. You should be okay going out the door, but once you've turned down the road towards your house, don't look back the other way again for anything. All right, goodbye then. Thank you so much. And with that, Diane turned and walked purposefully towards the door. As she reached it, she realized somewhat sheepishly that she hadn't even asked the man his name. However, she did not go back to ask him. She felt that, if she turned away from this door now, she might never be able to muster the courage to go through it again. Steeling herself as if for a dive into cold water, she pushed open the door to the pub and walked briskly back out into the street, head down, turning immediately to her right, the direction of home. There was literally no turning back now. Almost as soon as she stepped back onto the road, Diane felt the suffocating terror descend on her again, even stronger than before. The feeling of ice boring into the back of her skull was almost painful, her brain being pierced by two icy beams. For the first time, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye, shadows that really shouldn't be there if she were truly alone. While she was in the pub, the sun had set completely, and it was now pitch dark except for the weak, unnatural yellow phosphorescence of the streetlights. The city streets were mostly deserted, and the silence was palpable, except for Diane's footsteps and the unnatural echoes of her pursuer. Oh no, those footsteps. Maybe because she heard them first, or maybe she was just better at hearing than seeing, but the echoing footsteps behind her felt more real than anything else. She could swear she heard solid feet hitting the ground behind her, matching her steps a bit clumsily now. Sometimes a footfall would even sound at a different time than hers, making her sure someone was right behind her. Really close behind her. Maybe it was just the breeze, but she could even imagine feeling cold breath on the back of her neck. The creature was super close, so close she could tell. She felt its bad intentions in the air around her, its excitement and evil joy thinking about catching her, tearing her apart, and feeding on her fear, pain, and flesh. All it needed was one more look. And darn it, even though she knew that looking would be really bad for her, in her growing fear, she couldn't help but feel like she had to look behind her. That unseen presence breathing down her neck, staring at her with its eyes, filling her with horror, it was almost too much. Something about not being able to see it, not being able to turn and face it, felt even scarier than actually seeing the thing. She guessed that's what it wanted. In any normal situation, ignoring such a strong feeling of danger was just crazy. Vision was maybe the most important sense for humans. When you heard a strange noise or felt a strange presence, it was a basic instinct to turn and look for the danger. Not doing that felt like suppressing your strongest instincts. Even though her rational brain said the thing behind her couldn't hurt her unless she looked at it, a deeper, more animal-like part of her was screaming alarms, sure that looking was less dangerous than not looking. What if the man was wrong? What if this thing behind her could hurt her right now? What if its long claws were about to grab her throat, its jaws opening to swallow her whole? Troubled by scary thoughts, Diane clenched her teeth and started to run, not caring if someone saw her running from nothing and thought she was crazy. The footsteps behind her got even louder and didn't match her steps as she ran. She was shaking all over, her heart beating way too fast, super scared. She couldn't help picturing the thing behind her, her worst nightmare, what it might look like. Old memories of the imaginary monsters from her childhood came up and combined. She pictured a creature with a big, open, never-ending mouth full of scary, bloody teeth. A creature with too many arms and legs, all twisted in weird ways, each one ending with sharp claws. A creature with no order or balance, a crazy mix of terrible body parts and things to destroy. Or maybe the scariest of all, a creature that stayed on the edges of sight, shapeless, covered in darkness, a creature whose true form couldn't be pictured, because even imagining it in your mind would make you crazy. That's the creature that scared her as a kid. One she never tried to picture or name, a terrible IT promising terrors beyond her wild imagination, worse than her worst nightmare. Finally, Diane turned onto her street and saw her front door, so close, just a few running steps away. Filled with both fear and relief at the same time, she reached her small house really fast, crossing the scruffy, brownish grass of her yard, running up her front steps, struggling for a few scary seconds with the key to her front door, scared she might drop it. Finally, she shoved it into the keyhole and threw open the door. She closed the door behind her when she came in, but, like the man at the pub told her, she didn't turn around to lock it. She went straight upstairs to her bedroom. Even though she was in her own home, she still felt the thing following her, its eyes on her back, its footsteps on the stairs, even the sound of the front door creaking just a bit, like it was opening. But she was calmer now, knowing it was almost done. She went up the stairs at a fast walk, went through the hallway to her room at the same pace. She already knew what her talisman was going to be, a special gift from her childhood. Diane hadn't really overcome her fear of monsters lurking in the dark by herself. Her parents were loving but didn't take her fears seriously, which made her feel even worse. She was convinced that her fears were real, and it was disheartening that her parents didn't believe her. The person who actually helped her conquer her fears was her grandmother. When Diane was around 10, her grandfather passed away, and her grandmother moved into the same apartment complex as her family. One night, Diane woke up screaming from a nightmare while her grandmother was visiting. The kind old woman comforted her, coaxed her back to sleep, and the next day they had a long, serious talk about fears. Grandmother took Diane's concerns more seriously than her parents did. After a lot of talking, Grandmother told Diane that the only way to stop the monsters was to face them. Diane was horrified at the idea. "But they're so scary, Grandma. What could a little girl like me do? They'll just get me." "Well, Diane," her grandmother said, "there are only two possibilities. Either the dangers you fear are real, or they are the product of your imagination. If they are real, then it's easier for them to harm you if you don't know what they are. You're a smart girl, with strong parents who love you very much and would do anything to protect you. It would be hard for anything to harm you within the safe confines of your own home unless you were too afraid to defend yourself. Knowledge is power, Diane, remember that. If the dangers are just from your imagination, then if you stand tall and face those fears, you'll see that they can't hurt you. Laugh in their faces, and they'll disappear. Either way, it's better to face the things that scare you than to give in to them." The night after their talk, Diane woke up late at night to find that her parents had turned off her bedside lamp. She thought she heard rustling and was suddenly certain that something was hiding under her bed, waiting to grab her. Normally, she'd lie paralyzed with terror until morning, maybe even wetting her bed because she was too scared to get up and go to the bathroom. That night, though, she remembered her grandmother's advice. Gathering all her courage, she decided to reach across the gap between her bed and her nightstand and turn on the bedside lamp. Diane bravely sat up in bed, which was a brave thing to do all by itself. She took a few deep breaths and quickly lunged over to her nightstand, turning on the lamp. Nothing grabbed her, and the warm light spread across her room. Diane was surprised and happy that nothing bad happened. She could just go back to bed with the light on and probably sleep fine. But she realized that didn't really solve the problem, not all the way. Big girls didn't sleep with the lights on, that's why her parents always turned it off. When Grandma said to face her fears, she meant all the way. Now, empowered by this little victory, might be the only chance Diane had to muster the courage to do it. Trembling a little, hardly believing her own boldness, Diane got a small flashlight from her bedside drawer and turned the lamp off again. In the darkness, the unseen presence of the monster under the bed seemed to return immediately, and Diane's heart raced with fright. But she had to do this. With a loud, high-pitched war cry to inspire herself and alert her parents if anything actually went wrong, Diane jumped from the safe bed onto the floor. She dropped to her belly, switched on the flashlight, and pointed it under the bed. No monsters. Just a couple of dirty socks and a toy ball she thought she'd lost. When Diane's parents stormed into the room to see what was wrong, they found their daughter lying on her stomach on the floor, flashlight in hand, pointing and laughing happily at the space under her bed, as if she was the happiest girl in the world. The nightly terrors went away for the most part after that. To celebrate, Diane's grandmother bought her a music box as a gift. It played the song "I Whistle a Happy Tune" from The King and I. Now, running away from a monster she couldn't face, Diane chose her grandmother's music box as her special talisman. It represented conquering her fears, and she kept it on her nightstand next to her bed. Sometimes, she played it when she felt anxious or missed her grandmother. With a deep sense of relief, Diane picked up the music box and started to turn it over in her hands. Then she heard it, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard directly behind her, loud in the quiet house. It was almost undeniable proof that someone had followed her home. Diane drew in her breath, feeling a rush of adrenaline. The urge to turn around became almost unbearable. An unbidden thought rose from deep in her mind. This is your last chance. Your last chance to face your fear. But that was silly. Diane closed her eyes, ignoring her instincts and her grandmother's advice, and turned the music box over in her hands. Tenebras non timeo, qui nihil resident. More creaking behind her. Tenebras non timeo, qui nihil resident. Rustling, a bump, a sound like a door sliding open or shut. Tenebras non timeo, qui nihil resident. Silence. Taking a deep breath, Diane opened her eyes, set down the music box, and turned around. Behind her was only her empty, quiet, and familiar room. No monsters, no strange noises, no unseen presences. Diane felt a profound sense of relief and safety. She was home, safe and secure, and her pursuer was finally gone. She practically skipped back down the steps to lock her front door. After that, she fixed herself a glass of warm milk in the kitchen before heading up to bed. Getting ready to sleep, Diane still felt a slight sense of tension and unease, but it was nothing compared to what she'd just experienced. Everything would be better in the morning, the man had told her so. Diane had always felt safest at home in her own bed. She snuggled up tightly in the covers, rested her head on her soft pillows, and soon fell into the warm embrace of much-needed sleep. One night, Diane woke up from a deep sleep, feeling uncomfortable and with a dry mouth. As she slowly became aware, she recognized the sound of her grandmother's music box playing "I Whistle a Happy Tune." Normally, the tune made her feel happy, but now it unnerved her. Wondering how the music box could be playing, she realized someone must have wound it. That thought snapped her into full awareness. She tried to sit up but found herself restricted. Pain shot through her wrists and ankles. Terrified, she attempted to cry out but discovered she was gagged. Looking down, she saw thick ropes tying her to the bedposts. The chilling sound of metal sliding against metal sent her into a deeper panic. Diane struggled against her bonds, making muffled noises, but the ropes held tight. To her right, a voice spoke casually. "Ah, you're awake then. You're quite the heavy sleeper, you know. Didn't even flinch when I was tying you down, yet a little music does the trick right quick. Ah, eh?" The masculine voice seemed oddly familiar and spoke as if having a regular conversation, making the situation even more disturbing. Diane continued to struggle as the voice mentioned stepping on a creaky floorboard, fearing she would turn around. The voice chuckled darkly, and the sound of grinding metal continued to grate on her ears. "Let me calm your worries, kiddo. No ghosts or monsters are chasing you from some other world. Nobody's trying to snatch your soul away. Them footsteps you heard earlier, probably just your imagination playing tricks on you. But those footsteps after you left the pub." Diane's captor slowly came into her view. It was the man from the pub, his friendly smile turned into a mean, mocking grin. He held a sharp butcher knife, With a nasty laugh, he added, "Yep, that was me."